Hey everyone, and welcome back for another deep dive. Today we're tackling a topic that's, well, a little bit unnerving, to be honest, narcissism.
Yeah.
We're going to be using this book to guide our deep dive. It's called The Narcissist's Playbook by Louis Faxan. You
Good.
ever get that feeling like you meet someone and something's just a little off?
Yeah.
Like their charm is almost too good to be true. Well,
Mhm.
this book is going to help us unpack all of that. We'll figure out what narcissism really is, learn to spot those subtle signs, and most importantly, how to protect ourselves from people who might be playing by a different set of rules.
Oh, I like that. It's like we're going to be detectives today,
Nice.
piecing together clues to understand this complex personality trait.
I love that.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's start with the basics. When most people think of narcissism, they think vain or self-centered.
Right.
But this book suggests it goes much deeper than that.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. The book breaks it down into three core characteristics. Of course, there's that inflated sense of self-importance, the belief that they're special, superior, deserve constant admiration. But it's more than just loving the spotlight.
So what else is going on beneath the surface?
Well, the second characteristic is this constant craving for admiration. And it's not just enjoying compliments. It's a deep-seated need to be validated by others, to feed their ego.
So they need this like constant stream of praise to feel good about themselves.
Exactly. And here's where it gets really interesting. The third characteristic, and arguably the most important, is a lack of empathy. They struggle to understand or care about the feelings of others.
Wait, so they can be charming and lack empathy. That seems like kind of a dangerous combination.
It is. And that's why understanding this is so crucial. It's like getting X-ray vision for toxic behavior. You start to see that. The charm is often a tactic, a way to manipulate and control others.
Okay, that makes sense. But the book also talks about how narcissism isn't this like black and white thing. It exists on a spectrum, right?
That's a really important point. Not everyone who seems a bit self-absorbed is a full-blown narcissist. There's a range from healthy self-esteem all the way to narcissistic personality disorder, which is clinical diagnosis.
So how do we know where someone falls on that spectrum?
Well, that's where those behavioral clues come in. And the book gets pretty specific about what to look for.
Perfect, because I think we've all encountered someone who sets off those like narcissist alarm bells.
Right.
But how can we be sure?
One of the first things to look at is how they handle feedback or criticism.
Okay.
Someone with narcissistic tendencies will often react defensively, get angry, or even try to turn the situation around and make you feel bad.
It's almost like they can't handle the idea of being anything less than perfect.
Exactly. They might also have a pattern of blaming others for their own mistakes or failures. They'll rarely take responsibility for their actions.
Okay, I'm starting to see how this all connects. So beyond that initial charm and the defensiveness, what are some other behaviors we should watch out for?
Well, remember that lack of empathy we talked about? That can show up in a lot of subtle ways. Pay attention to how they treat others, especially those they see as beneath them. Do they interrupt constantly, talk over people? Do they have a hard time celebrating others' successes?
Wow, I never really thought about it like that. It's like they're so focused on themselves that they can't truly see or appreciate others.
That's precisely it. They often lack genuine interest in what others have to say. They might ask questions, but it's often just to steer the conversation back to themselves.
So it's not just about being self-centered. It's about how that self-centeredness impacts their interactions with everyone around them.
Exactly. And the book goes even deeper, explaining that there are different types of narcissists. You might have heard the terms overt and covert narcissism.
I have. But to be honest, I'm not sure I totally understand the difference.
So imagine like it. The stereotypical loud and proud boss who constantly brags, demands special treatment, and takes credit for everyone else's work. That's a classic example of an overt narcissist.
Right. They're not exactly subtle about their need for admiration.
No, they're not.
What about the covert narcissist? Are they kind of the opposite?
In some ways, yes. Covert narcissists can be much trickier to spot because they often play the victim. They might appear shy, sensitive, or even self-deprecating on the surface, but beneath that facade, they're still driven by that same need for admiration and control.
So it's more about manipulation and playing on people's sympathies.
Exactly. Think of the friend who always needs rescuing, always has a crisis, and somehow manages to make everything about them, even when something good happens to you.
Yeah, I know exactly the type of person you're talking about. It's like they need to be the center of attention, even if it's negative attention.
You're getting it. And it's crucial to remember that these aren't always clear-cut categories. People can display a mix of overt and covert traits, which makes it even harder to recognize the patterns.
So how do we start piecing together these clues and actually identify a narcissist in real life? The book mentions this thing called gaslighting. Is that like a key indicator?
That's a great question. And yes, gaslighting is a classic manipulation tactic used by narcissists. It's a way of making you doubt your own sanity and perceptions.
Okay, let's break that down. What does gaslighting actually look like in practice? Give us some examples.
Well, imagine you're in a relationship and you try to confront your partner about something hurtful they did. Instead of taking responsibility, they might deny it ever happened, twist the story around, or accuse you of being crazy for even bringing it up.
That's so messed up. It's like they're trying to rewrite reality to fit their own narrative.
Exactly. And over time, this constant manipulation can erode your self-esteem and make you question your own judgment. You start to wonder if you're being too sensitive or if you're imagining things.
That's scary. What are some other signs of gaslighting that people should be aware of?
Sometimes it's more subtle. They might constantly contradict you, even about small things, just to make you feel off balance. Or they might forget conversations or promises, leaving you feeling confused and like you're losing your grip on reality.
Oh man, this is all starting to sound a little too familiar. So how do we protect ourselves? What are some practical steps we can take if we think we might be dealing with a narcissist?
Well, first and foremost, it's important to trust your gut instincts. If someone consistently makes you feel uncomfortable, anxious, or like you're walking on eggshells, pay attention to those feelings. Don't dismiss them.
That's such an important point. It's easy to brush off those red flags, especially if the person is charming or if you're emotionally invested.
Exactly. And that's why we need to be armed with knowledge. The more we understand about narcissistic behavior, the better equipped we are to recognize it and protect ourselves.
This is also fascinating. I feel like we've just scratched the surface of this topic, and the book dives even deeper into specific scenarios where narcissism can play out right.
Yeah, like romantic relationships, the workplace, even social media.
Exactly. And that's where we'll be heading. In the next part of our deep dive, we'll explore how these narcissistic traits manifest in different areas of life, and we'll get even more practical with tips for dealing with these challenging personalities.
Awesome.
I can't wait. This is like a crash course in decoding human behavior. Stay tuned, everyone. This deep dive is about to get really interesting.
Welcome back, everyone. Let's pick up our detective work and zoom in on one of the most common and often most painful places where narcissism plays out. Romantic relationships.
Oh, yeah. I think most of us have encountered at least a few. Are those like red flags when dating?
Right.
But this book goes beyond just those surface level signs and gets into the sneaky ways narcissism can sabotage a relationship from the very beginning.
It's like they're reading from a different playbook, one where genuine connection isn't the ultimate goal.
Okay, so let's talk about those red flags. What are some early warning signs that someone might be bringing those narcissistic tendencies into a relationship?
One of the first things to look out for is how much they focus on themselves.
Okay.
Especially during those initial dates. Do they dominate the conversation, constantly steering it back to their accomplishments, their problems, their opinions?
Like they're using the date as an opportunity to perform for an audience rather than genuinely connect with the other person.
Exactly. And often they'll sprinkle in those compliments and gestures that seem incredibly romantic at first. But the book points out, this can be a tactic called love bombing.
Love bombing. That sounds intense. What is that exactly?
It's basically overwhelming someone with
affection,
gifts, and attention very early on in the relationship. It creates this whirlwind romance that can be intoxicating.
I can see how that would be easy to fall for. It's like they're creating this fantasy world where you feel like you're the center of their universe.
Exactly. But the problem is, it's not sustainable. And that's where the next red flag comes in. The rapid shift from idealization to devaluation.
So they build you up, make you feel like you're the most amazing person they've ever met, and then what? The bubble bursts.
That's the danger. Once they feel like they've won you over, the criticisms start creeping in. They might nitpick your appearance, your choices, your personality, things they initially seem to adore.
It's like that emotional whiplash. You go from feeling like you're on top of the world to feeling completely inadequate. And confused.
Exactly. And it's important to remember that this isn't about genuine feedback or constructive criticism. It's a tactic to undermine your confidence and make you more dependent on their approval.
Wow, this is getting heavy. And the book also talks about How narcissists can disguise controlling behavior as love, right?
Yes, and this is one of the most insidious aspects of narcissistic relationships. They might get jealous and possessive early on, trying to isolate you
Yep.
from your friends and family.
It's like they want you all to themselves, as if they're afraid of losing
Yeah.
their grip on you.
Exactly, and they'll often frame it as being protective or caring. They might say, I just love you so much, I want to spend all my time with you. But it's not about love, it's about control.
So how do you know if it's genuine concern
Yeah.
versus controlling behavior?
One way to tell is to pay attention to how they react when you try to assert your independence. Or set boundaries. Do they get angry, guilt trip you, accuse you of not loving them enough?
Oh, those are definitely red flags. So if you find yourself constantly making excuses for their behavior or walking on eggshells to avoid conflict, that's a sign that something's not right.
Exactly. And the book makes a crucial point. Knowledge is power. The more we understand these patterns, the better equipped we are to choose healthy, balanced relationships where our needs are respected.
Right, because staying in a relationship with a narcissist can have serious long-term consequences. We touched on gaslighting earlier, but the book goes deeper into how that manipulation can affect your mental health.
It can be absolutely devastating.
Yeah.
It's not just about the emotional roller coaster. It's about the gradual erosion of your self-esteem. You start to doubt yourself, your
Yeah.
perceptions, your worth.
Like you lose that inner compass. That tells you what's right and wrong, what's healthy and unhealthy.
You said it perfectly. Over time, this can lead to anxiety, depression, and a deep sense of isolation.
So it's not just about feeling unhappy in the relationship. It can have these ripple effects that impact your overall well-being.
Exactly, and the book emphasizes that. Healing from this type of abuse takes time, support, and often professional help. It's a process of rebuilding trust, both in yourself and in others.
Okay, so we've talked about those red flags in romantic relationships. What about family? The book mentions that narcissism can show up in those dynamics too, right?
Absolutely. And this can be one of the most challenging situations to
Okay.
navigate because family ties run deep.
It's not as easy as just breaking up with someone or unfollowing them on social media.
You're so right. And the book acknowledges how difficult it can be
Right.
to recognize and address narcissistic behavior within a family.
So what are some signs that those dynamics might be at play?
Well, it often starts with those subtle forms of emotional manipulation. Think about the parent who constantly guilt trips their children into doing what they want, or the sibling who always plays the victim to gain sympathy and control.
It's like they're using those emotional levers to get what they need without any regard for how it impacts others.
Exactly. And it can leave you feeling constantly trained,
Yes.
obligated, and like you're walking on eggshells.
So what can you do if you recognize these patterns in your own family?
Well, the book suggests a few key strategies, but it emphasizes that there's no one-size-fits-all approach. One of the most important things is to treat. Start setting boundaries, even if it feels uncomfortable or goes against those ingrained family roles.
That makes sense. But how do you set boundaries with someone who's used to getting their way and who might react negatively to those limits?
It's definitely not easy, but the book offers some practical tips on how to communicate those boundaries clearly and assertively. It also talks about the importance of emotional detachment.
Emotional detachment, what does that mean in this context?
It's about recognizing that you can't control the other person's behavior or force them to change. You can only control your own reactions and choose how much emotional energy you're willing to invest.
So it's about protecting yourself from their manipulation and emotional outbursts.
Exactly. It doesn't mean you don't care about them, but it means prioritizing your own well-being and refusing to play their game.
This is all such valuable information, but I'm curious to talk more about that elephant in the room, social media. We touched on it briefly earlier, but the book really dives into how these platforms can be both a breeding ground for narcissism and a tool for revealing those tendencies.
It's like social media provides the perfect stage for those narcissistic tendencies to flourish.
Because let's face it, we've all scrolled through our feeds and encountered those profiles that just scream, look at me, I'm amazing.
Absolutely. And the book points out that this goes beyond just enjoying the attention. For someone with narcissistic tendencies, social media can be an endless source of validation and a way to control their narrative.
So it's not just about sharing fun photos or connecting with friends. It's about using those platforms to build up their image and feed their ego.
Exactly. They might carefully curate their profiles to present this perfect life, brag about their accomplishments, or use subtle tactics to put others down and make themselves look better.
It's like they're constantly performing, from invisible audience, always seeking that external validation, to feel good about themselves.
And the book raises an important question. Is social media making us all a little more narcissistic? It's something to ponder as we navigate these digital landscapes.
That's a great point. We're constantly bombarded with images of perfection and success, which can make it easy to compare ourselves and feel inadequate.
Exactly. And even if we're not full-blown narcissists, those platforms can tempt us
Yeah.
to present a slightly idealized version of ourselves, which could feed into those same patterns of seeking validation and approval.
So it's not just about recognizing those extreme cases of narcissism on social media. It's also about being mindful of how we're using those platforms ourselves and making sure we're not falling into those same traps.
That's a great takeaway. It's all about finding that balance between sharing our lives authentically and being mindful of the potential pitfalls of those online interactions.
Okay, we've covered a lot of ground here. We've talked about romantic relationships, family dynamics, and social media. But what about the workplace? I imagine narcissism can be a real minefield in a professional setting.
You're absolutely right. And that's where we'll focus our attention. In the next part of our deep dive, we'll explore those telltale signs of a narcissistic colleague or boss, and most importantly, discuss some practical strategies for navigating those tricky dynamics.
Can't wait. I have a feeling this is going to be both insightful and incredibly helpful. See you on the next part. All right, so we're back for the final part of our deep dive into narcissism. We've explored the signs, the red flags in relationships, and the impact of social media. Now it's time to face the tough stuff. The damage that narcissistic behavior can inflict on those on the receiving end.
We're kind of shifting gears now
Yeah.
to focus on the mental and emotional toll that often gets overlooked.
Because it's not just about dealing with a difficult person.
Right.
It's about the lasting impact on your own well-being.
Yeah.
This book really drives that point home, doesn't it?
Absolutely. It highlights the very real mental health consequences of being on the receiving end, of narcissistic abuse we're talking about, anxiety, depression, even PTSD in some cases.
Yeah, that's heavy stuff. And I think it's important to acknowledge that these wounds don't always show up as this like obvious trauma.
Exactly. It's often the insidious, subtle erosion of self-worth that does the most damage. The book uses this analogy of a frog in boiling water. You don't realize the danger until it's too late.
Ooh, that's a powerful image. So someone might not even realize they're being harmed until they're already deep in the emotional quicksand.
You're right. And that's why it's so important to understand those long-term effects. The book shares some heartbreaking stories about people who've experienced this firsthand.
Do any of those stories stand out to you as particularly impactful?
One that really stuck with me was about a woman who had been married to a narcissist for years. She described feeling completely invisible, like her needs and opinions didn't matter at all. And the saddest part was that she started to believe it.
It's like that constant gaslighting and manipulation can just warp your sense of reality.
Precisely. She began to doubt her own perceptions, her judgment, even her sanity. It took years of therapy to rebuild her self-esteem and recognize that she deserved to be treated with respect.
That story is so powerful, and it underscores how crucial it is to reach out for support if you're struggling with the aftermath of a relationship with a narcissist.
Absolutely. The book emphasizes that you don't have to go through this alone. There are therapists who specialize in narcissistic abuse, support groups, and online resources that can provide guidance and encouragement.
And it's important to remember that healing is possible. It takes time, effort, and often professional help, but it's worth it.
100%. And the book provides some really practical tips for moving forward. One of the most important is setting firm boundaries in all your relationships, not just with the narcissist.
Okay, let's talk about boundaries. We've mentioned them a few times already, but this seems like the perfect moment to really dive into what that means in practice.
Think of boundaries as your emotional shields, protecting your well-being from those who might try to drain or manipulate you. It's about learning to say no without guilt, prioritizing your needs, and recognizing that you don't have to tolerate disrespectful behavior from anyone, regardless of who they are.
That's so empowering. But I imagine it takes a lot of courage to start enforcing those boundaries, especially if you're used to people-pleasing or putting others' needs before your own.
You're absolutely right. It's a process, and it takes practice. But the book provides some really helpful tips on how to communicate those boundaries assertively and effectively.
Like what kinds of tips? Can you give us some examples?
Well, it starts with recognizing your own needs and limits. What are you willing to tolerate? And what are your deal breakers? Once you're clear on that, you can start communicating those boundaries clearly
Yeah.
and calmly.
So it's not about being aggressive or confrontational. It's about being assertive
Yeah,
and standing up for yourself.
exactly. And the book emphasizes that. Consistency is key. If you start enforcing boundaries and then back down when the narcissist pushes back, they'll learn that. They can manipulate you into getting their way.
Okay, that makes sense. Consistency and clarity are crucial when dealing with someone who might try to test those boundaries.
Right. And remember, setting boundaries isn't selfish. It's about taking care of your own well-being and creating healthy, balanced relationships.
So boundaries are essential. But what other takeaways from the book can help people move forward and heal?
Another key point is the importance of rebuilding your self-esteem. After spending time with a narcissist, it's easy to feel depleted and unworthy. But the book reminds us that their opinions don't define our worth.
It's about reclaiming that inner confidence and recognizing that you are valuable, regardless of what the narcissist might have made you believe.
Exactly. It's about focusing on your strengths, celebrating your accomplishments, and surrounding yourself with people who genuinely support and appreciate you.
That's so important. It's about creating a positive, nurturing environment where you can heal and thrive.
And don't underestimate the power of professional help. A therapist can provide a safe space to process your experiences, develop coping mechanisms, and start to rebuild those damaged parts of yourself.
This has been such an insightful journey.
I agree.
We've explored the depths of narcissism, uncovered those hidden red flags, and equipped ourselves with tools to protect our well-being. But before we wrap things up, I want to circle back to that thought-provoking question you posed earlier about social media and its potential impact on our own narcissistic tendencies.
Yeah, it's a question worth pondering, especially as we navigate a world where online personas often overshadow authentic connections.
Because it's easy to get caught up in that cycle of curating our lives, seeking validation through likes and followers.
Exactly. And while social media can be a great tool
Yeah.
for connecting with others, it's important to be mindful of how we're using it and to make sure it's not feeding into those unhealthy patterns of seeking external validation.
So it's about finding that balance between sharing our lives authentically and being aware of those potential pitfalls.
You nailed it. It's about being conscious of our motivations and making sure our online interactions are aligned with our values and our overall well-being.
This deep dive has been intense, but ultimately empowering. It's given us a deeper understanding of narcissism and, most importantly, equipped us with the knowledge to protect ourselves and build healthier relationships. So to everyone listening, remember, you are not alone. There is support available, and healing is possible. Keep diving deep, stay curious, and take care of yourself.